Hi, everybody, and welcome to season 2 of Net of Love podcast. And thank you all so much for joining me for season 2 on this go around and the lovely souls that I get to talk with and connect with and find all these beautiful interconnections that we could never make up ourselves in these beautiful conversations. So I am here and joined by J.M. Barry, who just wrote a really cool book that we're going to talk about today. And has much to do with spirituality and higher dimensional understanding and interconnectedness. And I'll let her talk more about that. But we're going to start with a conversation about the power of name and talking about our spirit names a little bit and our experiences that brought us to receiving those names and how it plays out in our reality and our creations as well. So why don't I turn it over to you and we'll start there if you want to talk about your name and we'll kind of delve into that and see where we go.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, in 2011, I received the spiritual name Siddhi Kartakar, which is a mouthful, but it's from the Kundalini tradition, which is also Kundalini does a dance with the Sikh religion. So there's a lot of crossovers. Siddhi Karta is then based on the Hindu names. And it means, Siddhi means absolute and Karta is the work. So it's loosely translated as one who is a doer of big things or something of that matter, big doer or doer of the hands of the absolute. And I felt that was a big name to step into, but it was shocking actually when I received it. It was derived through numerology of your birth date and your place, latitude on the planet. And when I received the name, I thought I was looking for, I don't really so much like the word reinvent yourself, that never really sat well with me, but I was wondering what limitations I was connecting to from my history of life on this planet and what it would be like to have a new definition of my work, and getting a new name really helped me step into that.
Yeah. And I don't think I talked about it in season 1 at all. My spirit name that I received a few years ago is Arya. And for me, it's interesting when we look at our names because names hold a sound vibration too. And like you said, the numerology connection to it as well. And the name, when I received it, I kind of hear what you're saying a little bit too. Tell me if you resonate with this, but it was almost like a divine power transfer in that moment, not of, power over, but the ability to hold divinity within you in a new way that this name kind of holds, connected to your mission and your purpose, just like you talked about. And for me, I was shown in my outer reality more of what this name means. It came in more and more over time. And there was a gal who connected it to the new earth, meaning the new earth. And I've always felt my mission is very connected to helping to bring in the new earth and teaching others that it comes from within us, that, that outer reality is transformed by us arising within. So the really cool part is before Joanne and I started recording, we were talking about Bluestone, and I had a dream about Bluestone. So let's go there as well, if you want to go with that.
I love what you're saying because when I've listened to your podcast, I certainly felt that energy, your connection, and I love hearing the language around that. About our work in this new earth. I don't have the opportunity to have that many conversations, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Siddhi Karta is the yogic name. And then my yoga teacher at the time, we were having a conversation. I felt like I didn't have a last name. And she said, she just looked at me and she kind of just pulled it out of the air and she just gave it to me. She said, Bluestone. And I thought, oh my gosh, I never would have picked that. I never would have thought of it, but I really like it. And I like how it goes with the first name.
Yeah. And then I talked to you about my dream of these blue boulders coming down, like 2 nights ago, I think it was,
That's
coming down a hill. And then I was walking down a path the next day at a park, and I'm walking up the path, and there's all these blue boulders, and I'm like, okay, something's here. I got to pay attention. And then I look to the left, and there's a pile of bluestone. So it's just that beautifulness of the interconnectedness of us, sometimes it's us knowing we're coming into each other's field at a higher plane level, that telepathy that happens, also how that can play out within and without. So the bluestone, and just to start talking about your book a little bit, which I'm so intrigued by, and I read a little bit of the parts that you've released already, and it feels so multidimensional and so fitting for our times with some of the discussion and lessons that are probably in there. So do you want to talk about the connections there as well?
Yeah. But one of the phrases that comes to my mind right now is dreaming awake at the end of time. And that is something that Terence McKenna, I think, spoke on, and that's even the name of one of his lectures. And that just stuck with me. It's so full, just even that phrase, to spend some time with how that feels. And I think that is how I saw myself. Like, I want to use the power of my imagination to do something radical. And my studies in the last 10 years, my time with teachers and retreating deep into nature has showed me that it's all an inside job, it's all inside, and that I want to instill what I have sat with and felt and share it, but I didn't know how. And when the story came to me, I thought, oh, this is how we do it, by creating something new that shows the highest level of our heart's desire. And this is it. Like, if I could do anything, this is what I would do. So, through the life of this character who is involved in a long saga, a family saga, and a hero's journey in a strange land. And she basically builds the world that she wants to live in. And nothing excites me more than the idea of building our dreams.
The divine architecture. Yeah. From the self. It's so beautiful. Dreaming awake at the end of time. Where does the end of time piece fit in for you as far as the integration of what that means, would you say?
Yeah, I love the phrase. Over the past 10 years, especially since 2012, anytime I threw that out there as a tester in an audience, people not so big on it. They don't want to talk about the end of time. I'm like, I'm not saying life is over. I'm saying time. So there's a little resistance. But I remember even as a child, I was obsessed with clocks. I'm like, who figured out how to measure time and how? And I learned about candles and how they had candles marked with the hours, and water clocks, medieval water clocks. I was fascinated with this idea of measuring time and giving it those standards. And also that it didn't make sense to me that time is abstract, that you shouldn't be able to measure and quantify and calculate it as we do and depend on it, that it's bigger than that, or our life experience is bigger than something time could measure. So I've been taking that apart, especially through science fiction. I've always been a lover of science fiction because it's like a test tube for you to challenge these ideas and throw people in a situation and see what comes out. So and then of course in 2011 I got very interested in the Maya civilization and the predictions, the prophecies about the calendars and the Baktuns and the turning over, and everything I read resonated with me. I mean, I'm no expert, but I researched as much as I could into translations and over hundreds of years what other people brought from different centuries in their reading these translations and trying to understand what's being said. And what I walked away with was the end of history. So it's not the end of time, it's the end of history. So it's the end of measured time. It's the end of time as we know it, perhaps, but the new earth on the other side, and that's what's coming.
Yeah, as we've been comfortable with it. And now we're energetically being asked to expand our understanding of time.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like, you're right, it does bring up some fear for people because it kind of brings up those end times conversations. And that I've talked a lot about this through my ministry, the whole word about apocalypse. But apocalypse actually means an uncovering. It's,
Mhm.
you know, it's not as intensely catastrophic as it was
Right.
shown to us through Hollywood and media and those kinds of things. So the revelations in the Bible and end times and those pieces can there. I think there was a lot of fear infiltration there, when really it's exciting because we are shifting out of time as we once knew it into this, like, from being in time to out of time, where we're transcending time and space in our consciousness. It's no longer kind of keeping us limited, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
that understanding that all time is right here, right now. Past,
Yeah.
present, future has always been here right now, and they intersect and overlap. It's not as, we can get into quantum physics and parallel realities and multiverses and all those types of things. But as we evolve and evolve our understanding, we can not have to be so dependent on the clock and time the way we used to. And I've noticed that just from coming out of a more, 8 to 4 job, where you're so bound by time. And that I remember on the weekends, I would feel like I was out of time. So it was a year ago, I went on my own with my own business. And the shift on the weekends, I would feel out of time. And during the week, I would be very regimented. And it was hard to see that. But the two worlds were starting to come together, if that makes sense. And which is that transition as we're ascending. And the out of time feeling on how things come together now is totally different than how things came together, like in the corporate world, for example, or the business world. Like the way you and I met, it just kind of flows, and the resonance comes in, and then the things happen, and then you work together, and you may not see each other for a while, and it just flows, and everything comes to you when you need it and at the right time that you need it. And it's no longer this need to control or grasp onto having to have things that certain way anymore. It's this flow that occurs. The Egyptians called it nefraka, in beautiful flow, right? That we just can blissfully feel. But we often lose that when we start to go into the lower thought forms, right? And we start to go in those lower energies. So it's definitely a transition that we're facing collectively and individually at the soul level, that is different and unique to try to get used to and integrate when we're used to doing things a certain way as we did before.
I love the way you explained that. That was beautiful.
Yeah, and it's challenging sometimes because you feel like you're in that flow sometimes, but as you're still trying to transition out of these lower aspects, it's reminding you, just let it go. Just let it go. Not always so easy though, is it?
No, it's like someone telling you have this amazing power and then you keep forgetting it. I mean,
Yes.
putting the shine back on the glass. I've been doing a meditation practice for years since I've been writing, which is stilling myself when my mind is very busy at night and I can't sleep, stilling myself and being like, oh, right, I have the ability to create whatever I can imagine. What would I create if I could build anything? And I'll be practicing that, my thoughts, but even in that powerful moment, I'll be sidetracked by concerns and sideways, motions that come in and throw me off track. And, half an hour, I'm like, wait a minute, I was supposed to be doing that exercise of bringing towards me the thing that I want the most. And so that just goes to show we can easily forget what we already do have.
Right. And the daily things of paying your bills and all those kinds of things can make us forget that divine aspect of ourselves sometimes. And I like what you said, because what if I could do anything, what would I do? Or what if fear was not an obstacle, what would I do? And for me, I kind of said to myself, okay, if I could do anything and spend my time on anything I wanted, what would it be? And it was always about talking about spirituality, because it's like this ignition and this spark and this light goes off when two beings are resonating in a conversation about divinity. And I've always just loved those moments. And I have that with you. I felt that with you the first time I met you. And when you're doing what you love, the rest just kind of comes when it's supposed to come. And I've learned that through this process. But like you said, we can forget that sometimes when we're worried about paying the bills, or we're in those more dense, dense frequencies, for sure.
Yeah. Or even other people's reflections, spoken or unspoken. Somebody's like, how is she doing that? How is she doing that? And then all of a sudden I'll be like, wait a minute, should I be doing this way? How am I doing this?
Right. And that's a good point. I was recording a little like mindful moment this morning about others and how our consciousness projects out a lot of our I don't know, it is insecurity sometimes, or the things we question ourselves, and then all of a sudden somebody in the outer reality is questioning it, and then we would question it even more. And that shift, that shift from not having the outer reality inform who we are to having our inner spiritual fire inform who we are, our soul signature inform the outer reality, and trying to make that shift. So it sounds like the character in your book is really doing that throughout this hero's journey, that Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Beautiful word that I love to talk about, that the best films like Star Wars and all those films have that journey of, the struggle and the triumph of the struggle, and thinking you're right there and then falling, and then it's the ascension path. It's mirroring the ascension path. So let's talk about that for a minute. And you talked earlier about how this book came to you. Do you feel like this has always kind of been a part of you? And I'm sure there's lots of parts of you in this book, but did you feel like there was lots of higher dimensional aspects that you were kind of pulling in as well?
Completely. And the earth, like the in its purest form, this magical spaceship we live on. I don't know how else to describe it, but mostly coming from the earth,
that remembrance.
Years ago I moved up to North Carolina and lived in a very different way, up and around the mountains in Asheville, because I wanted to get in deeper. And it was there where I had my deepest connections with nature. I should say, adding after my pilgrimages to England, where I also spent the most time out of doors that I've ever spent in my life, just days and days on end, hiking and being on the land. So it was really those experiences of touching into the land, which my nature is actually more kind of the star and sky and air, and not necessarily very rooted, grounded person on the earth. And it was really through those experiences in the last 10 years that made me feel earth connected. And that is where the story came from. It literally came up out of the ground.
Wow. Yeah, like you said, that magical spaceship. And I like to add in playground, because you talked about the inner child aspect of this book that's so important. And we can't experience those blissful states, those higher dimensional states, unless we are in resonance with that inner child in our heart. And the magic and the beauty of that is out of time. That, that like the boulders, for example, that we were talking about earlier. Now, can you reveal that blue stone piece part of your book yet, or do you want to keep that a secret?
I think so. No, I think I can reveal it. It does come on early on in the story. There's a hyperdimensional scientist who lives at the bottom of the sea on an Earth-like planet. And her race of beings, they're from the Andromeda galaxy, but they have developed a way of being. They're sort of human, they're humanoid, but they have solely dedicated themselves to the pursuit of knowledge and research. So they colonize the bottom of the sea to collect data about the ocean, because they don't have oceans in their home world. So they're fascinated with the sea creatures and all the magic of the undersea world, which of course is something that I've loved since I was a child.
Yeah.
So this young scientist, she's brilliant, not only studies all these sea creatures, but she's also hybridizing carbon with silica to make a living computer. So she does many experiments and keeps her work secret. She also has a drone computerized companion who gets involved and assists her in some of these things. But she invents a miniature living computer, which has the ability to store information, but also it's handheld. It's very small. She can take it anywhere. It also gives her the ability to measure probabilities. So she doesn't exactly see the future, past, and present, but she sees the likelihood of things, how they might be, and the outcomes. And this is how she moves forward in the world, making decisions.
So you're bridging. We often see how technology is just a reflection of what we already could do within our divine inner technology, like the World Wide Web and telepathy and those things that that interconnectedness, have always been there, just didn't know and understand it. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you're bridging that a little bit in this book. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you're also dropping some key codes about how our bodies shift from that more carbon-based model to this more light body based model over time as the planet ascends. So that's very exciting. I can't wait to see how that plays out. All right, let's talk. You have so many awesome experiences, and your beautiful artwork we didn't even talk about, and the work you have done in museums. Can we talk about that for a few minutes? It just fascinates me so much. Yeah. And, if there's any just really cool experiences, we've talked about history before, and I always say history is one thing, but it only showed part of it. It didn't tell our story. It told his story. So the cool things that you've experienced and seen, especially spiritual type things in museums that you can relate to if anything pops up.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for asking. I love talking about these experiences as well. So I studied art conservation, so I attained a master's degree and specialized in paintings conservation, which basically means I spend a lot of time looking very, very closely at paint layers and ensuring that they adhere to the canvas. So a lot of tiny little nitpicky work, putting flakes of paint back. That's been the most of my work. It doesn't sound that exciting, but when you're in a museum and you get to be around all these objects from different centuries, it is very fulfilling. And I had some really fantastic experiences early on in my career of just getting to be in close proximity with historic objects. And one of the things I noticed when I was working at a city in a large museum was that I liked being in the collection when nobody else was, or when it was nighttime, or just a few people around. It was very quiet. But to approach these objects from an acute oblique angle, or just come in and, not see things necessarily with the sound and the light, but just sense them and approach them slowly. So I got to be around some medieval objects in a fantastic museum in New York, and I had this job where I could be in there at night, and I was discovering all these passageways through the lower levels and coming up into the collections, not knowing where I was in the museum, and then just being completely surprised by, maybe it was like an 11th century coat of arms or a suit of armor on horseback, and, in the dark, and experiencing these objects with no preparation, just all of a sudden it was there in my field. And I was noticing, I was sensing a lot more coming off these objects in those situations. And so I knew that studying conservation just lit me up, because I just loved being around historic objects. And a little
It
bit.
sounds like a movie with you in the basement of a museum, and something really exciting happens, and you're like, "Whoa!"
Oh God, that's where I could hear the sounds, you know, from previous centuries.
I gotta say, one of my favorite aspects of that museum is Hatshepsut, the pharaoh, who was a female pharaoh, and just coming. I haven't been to Egypt, and I cannot wait to go to Egypt. But the just coming into that room with her there in her Sphinx form, and the beautiful message that gives to women of her, the power of her holding the Godhead, right? And how it was possible for women to do that, and how so much was destroyed throughout history in so many ancient sites where women were profoundly a part of this divine age at one point, or how they influenced the ages throughout history. And seeing her in her Sphinx form is that transfer of power a little bit that we talked about earlier, to say anybody can do this, any soul can start this path and work toward this beautiful I call it that self-love journey, because you're coming into your divinity, and that is love. That is pure love. Mm-hmm. So yeah. Anything else you want to share about the museums?
Oh, I love that about Hatshepsut. I've done a bit of research on that too. I was very curious about what they found and what they examined as far as DNA and all. And
yeah,
that story's been very much the erasing. It's, you know, what's been erased, of course, is what's the most interesting to me. And in the Greco-Roman wing of the museum, it's kind of like far in the back, a little bit to the right, past the cafeteria. There's these objects that I kind of just don't get that much attention, because there's so many other things to see. But I sort of kept a little notebook, and I started my own little recording of anything that I saw that related to this erasing of history, you know, this erasing of, I suppose, any evidence of this goddess-based religion, or a time where women ruled, or ruled equally with men, or instead of men. And everything pointed back to Crete. So a lot of these objects I found were from Crete, and all had prefixes and parts of words that all related to this net, back to the net again, dicte, the net, and the weaving. And you know, I'm very much into the weaving and the fibers, and the women's work of again, measuring time, the fates, right, with the weaving and the measuring of time.
That's so where the name Net of Love came from.
Oh yeah,
you're tapping right into it.
Right. So yeah, these smaller, often ignored objects became, you know, just little drawings, and I started filling my notebook with anything I was seeing, and I'm like, yes, it is here. And so it was this little symbol of the dove on all these relics, and these were all ritual objects used at a time when the goddess culture was alive. And so my research kept pointing back and back, further and further in Crete, and I spent years studying the history of Crete and the geography of Crete and what happened with the tidal wave and all of that. But I was collecting evidence for these objects that do exist in our time right now, and sort of weaving my own story of putting these objects back in their place, and now creating a story where you could see how these objects functioned. And one of them being the sculpture, a very large sculpture called the Dame Elche in Elche, Spain. This statue was found, and it's outside of the art historical record. So none of the archaeologists really want to touch it, because they say they can't identify where it's from. It's carved in limestone, but it doesn't match the time period that it should be from. And it was dug up by an amateur, so they really lost all the archaeological reference of everything around it. And statue, which I'll hold up a picture for you to see.
Thank you.
This is a part of it, her face. Yes.
Wow. And this was found in Crete, you said?
This was actually found in Spain, in Elche.
This was in Spain, and it's female, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It's a powerful female figure, and she's wearing a incredibly elaborate headdress. It almost looks like she has two tambourines or small drums strapped to her headdress over her ears, with beads, a lot of ornamental jewelry, holding who knows what. I have my ideas of what was in all these ornaments in her jewelry. There's just the blue stone in the front. Yeah, the whole ritual and rites of the sacred and the place of oracles and prophets within the goddess culture.
And the top looks like the lotus petals of a Buddha,
Mm-hmm.
the open lotus petals of the crown,
Mm-hmm.
which is, interesting that, to see that in other parts of the world as well.
Yeah.
So fascinating. Yeah. And then it doesn't go into the history, because if it goes back too far, then, it would change the paradigm of, the narrative that we have going now.
That's one of the open loops in my book that keeps going, and it expands into the infinite. So there's many directions, but back to the conversation on time again.
Yeah, it all goes together. And like you said, the changing of things and the removal of things with the feminine, and having painted the feminine in the shadow aspect so profoundly for so long, that us having lost the divine feminine connection. So, we've talked about the goddess aspect. Some people hear that, and the imprint they already might feel is this shadow feminine power over. But that's what was removed, is the divine, nurturing, fertile, loving, intuitive, receptive, divine feminine aspect that was removed, that became so masculine, and sometimes shadow masculine as a result, because of that removal of the feminine. So I'm excited as we shift out of time for our story to finally be remembered and revealed again. That revelation, that uncovering of the beautiful aspects of the feminine that are coming forth, and women are being empowered and stepping into that aspect. And I think it's important to say here too, though, that all men and all women have divine feminine, divine masculine within them. That's the creational energies of the universe. And
so easily confused in many day and ages, but especially in this day and age.
Yes. And when a society has worked so hard to keep the feminine energetics out of the society in such a profound way, in connection to God, that impacts who women believe they are. It impacts how men relate to women. So there's so much of that shadow that we are working to clean up within us, that I've been profoundly surprised throughout my awakening how much those imprints were within me, that I didn't realize, on how much healing had to be done. And not even so much of the shadow feminine, but of the shadow masculine.
I hear that.
Yeah.
And I love that we're talking about the shadow, and I want to, we can have a whole nother conversation about this, but just recently it's come to my attention of really what my work is, and what the shadow work is, and my earlier perception of this darkness and the fear, but that what lies in the shadow are all the parts of yourself that you abandoned.
Right.
So shadow work should be fabulous. You're going in to reclaim what you abandoned in yourself. And if you don't do the work, it's what comes out is the darkness, but it's
subconsciously, without knowing it on, that autopilot, right? It just happens if you're not going to become conscious of it. Yeah. And the shadow aspects are so interesting, because that is connected to revelation and ascension, that those are the parts of ourselves that need to be revealed, so that they can no longer be neglected, seen, felt, and heard, so that it's not influencing the consciousness collectively and individually to such an intense manner. But right, and that's kind of like the the word Lilith often comes up when we talk about the shadow feminine. And there's a lot of human constructed belief around those aspects that are limiting, unfortunately, sometimes. So, I hear a lot of people bring up Lilith, and it's that Garden of Eden scene and those types of things, and those myths. Trista Haggerty was on my podcast last season. We talked about stripping of those myths and the importance of not connecting so deeply to those myths that we forget our divinity. And they were those archetypes, those hats that show us aspects of who we are, not necessarily the wholeness of who we are.
Right.
Yeah.
And I love the classics and myth, and I love going back to visit them, but we are in time for new archetypes, or maybe they're not even archetypes anymore. They're called something else. And there's so much emphasis in what's going on right now on the globe with, the way things appear, the physical appearance, especially with the whole blurring of the lines between masculine and feminine, and, whatever evolution this is of, humans' sexuality suppressed, whatever that is, it's going to play out. But the external is the least important, but of course it's the one that gets the most attention. And so back to the shadow work and balancing one's own masculine and feminine energies, that can be uncomfortable for people. It doesn't have to look that way on the outside. You're doing it internally, and some of the women in my life that I look up to so much, they're very feminine, but they have such strong divine masculine energy, and it's beautiful to be in.
Yes, it is. And when we neglect certain parts of those, and the aspects of ourselves, then we're not fully whole too. And, I love the aspect of the divine masculine that is so creative, that is so, and it goes to the sexuality pieces of it. That's why it was so profound in the divine human creation. How this all played out is that the protrusion and projection of our creation through this masculine power is so beautiful, and the ability for the feminine to be that receptive and flowing nature versus the opposite of that, and for them to work together in tandem and in partnership and in resonance, is that flow we sometimes are not in, that gets a little confusing.
And we don't have many stories about it anymore. When we do have stories of those two energies working together, it can be very much fall into the storybook image, again, the image of the masculine and the feminine. But we do want to see it. I want to see it. I want to see it because it's about wholeness. It's not about that man with that woman. It's about wholeness within the self.
Right.
And that's what we all want.
The yin and the yang and all the beautiful powers of creation. Nice. Let's talk about the title of your book for a minute. I know you kind of changed things around, and just so people know, and then how can they find it?
Well, I do have a website that has I think it has 3 episodes available to download. It's Kairostone.com. So it's spelt with a K, Kairostone. It really should be Kairos Stone with 2 S's, but for the website and for pronouncing it, I just left it with the 1 S because it was a very sounding when I was saying it, especially hearing my voice recorded for the first time. There is a narration available on the website. I think it's the first 10 minutes of the book is narrated by Sylvia Loveridge and myself. So the title did change. Initially, I had called it The Lady of the Dove, and it was about linking all this evidence I was finding about these relics from Crete back to the sisterhood and this goddess culture. But the story got bigger than that. That was just one part of the story, and the story expanded around it to be much, much bigger. There is a sisterhood in the story, and they play a part, but they're not the focus of the story. The character who invents the blue stone, she's the creator of the blue stone, is the starting point of the story. And so I changed the title to be really about the stone, the Cairo stone. And Kairos is, I guess it's a Greek word, which means like the moment of clear thinking or clear knowing.
Mm.
And it's an expression, I think I came across it from looking at a carving, a Greek carving of a figure. It was called the Kairos. And I have seen it in culture recently in other book titles, but not as a stone. So it's kind of revisiting again, a kind of a classic concept of clear knowing, clear thinking, clear feeling, and then acting on that.
Yeah. Beautiful, which is very connected to the crystalline energies and, you know, the ability for crystals to hold information.
I love that. Yes.
and it's so cool because that clarity that comes, that's where the most beautiful divine creations come from, because you're so clear, you're so open, and then it just flows through you, and it's so pure, and that inner child peace that comes. So yeah, I'm so excited to read the rest of this. It's wonderful. Let me ask you really quick before we wrap up. What does the dove symbolize for you?
Well, there's a whole our historical very long history of that image, you know, that I'm trying to stay away from, and just really what it just feels to me. And it's about beauty and purity, yeah. And of course the ability to fly. I just recalled a time where I had a basket of doves at my friend's wedding, and she didn't know, and they opened the basket at the end of the ceremony, and these doves flew up, and I still like can get a little verklempt just thinking about it. But it's just that it's like your hope, your wishes taking flight, you know, your dreams taking flight.
Yeah, and I love that. It's so beautiful. And I talk about the symbol. I talk a lot about the symbolism of animals with in meditation circles and those types of things. And you know, when I spend some time at the park, I'll be hanging out with the 20 vultures that are in the trees and just watching them and intuitively picking up on, you know, when they spread their wings and they're drying them out and the sun's coming, and the crow that comes, and the personalities that they have, the animals. And that's what that dove resonance, right, of that purity and that peace and that signification throughout history. Really, it's there all the time. We find it all the time, especially in spirituality and metaphysics. It shows up a lot,
right?
That bird holds, and the ability to take off and fly and do it from that clarity. That's when we do fly, is when we're in that clarity, in that all-knowing, that open feeling.
Right.
Beautiful.
And there are a lot of birds in the book, and actually one of the characters in the book is a bird. So there's more. There's more to be discovered. I know that one of the places I have to market interest in this is with bird lovers, because how many people have a fantasy, a psychedelic story about birds, you know, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you heard about this. The day that I was ordained as a minister, I have a connection to hawks, which I'm sure you're not surprised by with the Egyptian lineage. I was, you know, my neighbor, I was on my neighbor's property, and I walked, I was going for a walk through trails, and I went away. I wasn't planning to go. And I look down, and there's a hawk in the ground, nosedived in, completely dead in the ground. And just straight up like that. And it couldn't have happened long before that, because it was so,
wow.
It was right there. You could tell, like, you could feel like the energy was still there. And it was the day that I was ordained. So it was just, and I see hawks quite a bit. They fly over my windshield saying good morning quite often. That, you know, that earthly connection that you talk so much about in the book, and the earth talking to us. And that hawk was such a symbol for so many things, you know, over the next few weeks that came in, that was just so profoundly connecting to Mother Earth, to all of it, that, you know, that working in tandem co-creatively, and it speaking, the divinity of the earth speaking to you through these symbols and through these moments that happen to us. So I'm so glad you brought up the bird. Anything else you want to share before we go? Anything else you can think of?
How can we, let's find a way to wind down, because I could keep on going, but
Yeah.
the falcon is a big part of my story. And there's been, I've had visits from falcons, quite a few. And often when I'm asking, like, wow, what am I doing? What have I done? Not what am I doing? What have I done? This thing is big, and what do I do? And I suppose that the character in the story that most represents me is the bird character, and he's in the form of a falcon. And
you're divine masculine.
and just recently, the falcon has started visiting me again. And I mean, the first couple of times I saw it, I didn't think it was real. I was like, it looks exactly.
Is it a hologram? Right. I did that too, because it happens so often. I'm like, okay, this is good.
Am I really seeing this? And, yeah.
Yep.
So thank you. Yeah, love the symbols from nature coming to us as verification and inspiration.
Yeah, and in that removing of the divine feminine, right? Going back to that again, and the having those moments were often looked at as like some evil connection that was happening, not a spiritual connection, which I say for my listeners who may not have, opened up to a lot of these concepts or be aware of a lot of these concepts. But I think what was happening is this covering up of our interconnectedness that our consciousness has with everything. And, talking about like witchery and things like that. And the word spelling came from spells because it's the power of the word. It's the power of thought that creates our realities. It's the power of consciousness. And we just talked about that divine consciousness of open clarity and the purity that comes from that, and these beautiful moments with the hawks and the boulders and this divine magical playground that you are doing through your book. And I try to do through these podcasts to show people that there is a reality that has been veiled to us for so long that is so divine and so magical here, like that divine matrix that we can tap into through love, that is just something that is our birthright. And it's so exciting to talk to people like you writing a book about exactly that and the experiences of the hero's journey to be able to resonate with that reality once again. And I know you probably agree with me that is where we're going collectively as we shift out of time. And all of these beautiful ancient mystery school secrets and historical pieces are being revealed and uncovered so that we can understand how to do this. So everybody can be taught how to do this. And it's not just for priests and priestesses. It's for everybody. It's for all of us. So
you're such a shining example of that light. And it's so good to talk to another being who identifies that. There's so much fear mongering that is being thrust with the taking down of the 3D, and for us to remember that that's a good thing, because what's coming is this much larger, more connected world that's based on love,
right? And flow and bliss, our natural state. Like I had an experience with one of my clients and recently, and they're like, wow, this feels so amazing. The meditation work and the things that can happen in meditation. And my whole being is just like, yes, but this is how it was always supposed to be. This is what was always available to us, that we fall into lower thought form, into fear and scarcity consciousness, that we can't access how we were created to be able to live and feel and connect with each other, our essence as a humanity, which is really beautiful, and a big shift from where we've been for so long in these dark ages that we're coming out of.
Yeah, the disconnect from recalling that we can build the worlds that we wish to inhabit.
Yeah, created in the image.
Love it.
Beautiful fractals of light we are. All right. So really quick again, your website is Cairo Stone with a K, KAIROSTONE.com. And you can see the parts of the book that have been released so far. And I look forward to talking to you again. This was the first time Joanne and I actually talked for great length, but you just meet soul family and you just know, you just feel it. It's there. So I knew we were going to have an amazing conversation just based on the little bit I knew about you. So
It was beautiful, and viewing the stars under that.
yes, that's how we met. We were viewing the stars. We were staring at Orion's belt together, believe it or not.
During my Saturn returns. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. It was so good to be with you, and we will talk again sometime soon.
Thank you, Amanda. I've loved listening to your podcast. I feel so connected.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that very much. Thanks for coming into my net of love.
All right. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.